In the vast expanse of an alien swamp forest, shrouded in perpetual twilight, a lone human explorer named Elias floated silently on his small boat. The air was thick with humidity and the scent of strange vegetation that seemed to pulse with life. Elias had been traveling for weeks, navigating through this eerie labyrinth of towering trees, whose roots twisted into the murky water like ancient fingers clawing at the sky. He wasn't sure how he'd ended up here. His ship had malfunctioned during a routine mission to chart unknown planets, leaving him stranded on this uncharted world. Elias leaned over the edge of his boat, peering into the dark waters below. They shimmered faintly, as though reflecting light from some unseen source. Strange creatures darted beneath the surface, their shapes distorted by ripples and shadows. His stomach growled loudly, reminding him it had been hours since his last meal, a bland ration bar that tasted like disappointment wrapped in chalk. He sighed, running a hand through his sweat-drenched hair. Survival out here felt less like adventure and more like punishment. The swamp was alive with sounds. Croaks, clicks, and distant roars echoed around him. Occasionally, glowing insects would flit past, casting soft halos of light against the gnarled bark of the trees. It was beautiful in its own way, but also terrifying. Every sound could be something harmless or something hungry, and every shadow might belong to a predator lying in wait. As night deepened, Elias noticed movement ahead. A figure struggled weakly in the water, thrashing wildly as if caught in an invisible current. At first, he thought it was just another bizarre creature native to this planet. But then he saw long strands of silver hair floating around her face. She was humanoid, no, not quite. Her skin glowed faintly blue under the dim light, and her features were sharp yet delicate, almost otherworldly. Without hesitation, Elias paddled closer, gripping the oar tightly despite the ache in his arms. "Hold on," he shouted, though he doubted she understood him. As he reached her, he realized she was unconscious, her body limp and sinking fast. With one swift motion, he hooked his arm under hers and hauled her onto the boat. She collapsed onto the wooden planks, gasping for breath, her chest rising and falling rapidly. Elias stared down at her, unsure what to do next. She was unlike anyone or anything he'd ever seen before. Her ears tapered into elegant points, and faint markings adorned her neck and collarbone, glowing softly in patterns that seemed to shift unpredictably. Despite everything, she was stunningly beautiful. An alien huntress who looked like she belonged in legends rather than reality. "Okay," Elias muttered to himself, breaking the silence. "Now what?" When the woman finally stirred, Elias nearly jumped out of his skin. He'd been sitting cross-legged beside her, keeping watch while trying not to stare too obviously. Her eyelids fluttered open, revealing eyes that glowed like twin moons, one golden, one silver. She blinked slowly, confusion etched across her face as she took in her surroundings. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, without warning, she sat bolt upright, grabbing Elias by the collar of his shirt. Her grip was surprisingly strong, and her voice came out low and guttural, though tinged with panic. Whatever language she spoke sounded musical yet harsh, completely foreign to Elias's ears. "Whoa, whoa!" he exclaimed, raising his hands defensively. "I'm not going to hurt you. I saved you." She tilted her head, studying him intently. Slowly, her grip loosened, and she released him, leaning back slightly. Her gaze swept over the boat, then back to Elias. Though they couldn't communicate verbally, there was an undeniable intelligence in her expression. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she pointed to herself and said one word, "Zanara, Zanara." Elias repeated, nodding. He tapped his chest. "Elias." Her lips curved into a faint smile, though it vanished quickly. Zanara gestured toward the swamp, speaking again in her melodic tongue. When Elias shook his head, indicating he didn't understand, she let out a frustrated sigh and slumped back against the side of the boat. "Well," Elias said awkwardly, scratching the back of his neck, "this is going to be fun." Despite the language barrier, the two soon fell into a rhythm of sorts. Zanara proved resourceful, using her knowledge of the swamp to guide them away from dangerous areas. She pointed out edible plants growing along the banks and mimed warnings about certain creatures lurking beneath the surface. In return, Elias shared his remaining rations, which earned him a grateful, if skeptical, look from Zanara. Their journey took on a surreal quality. The swamp seemed endless, stretching far beyond the horizon. Days blurred together as they navigated narrow channels and wide-open lakes, always moving deeper into the heart of the alien wilderness. Along the way, they encountered wonders that defied explanation. Bioluminescent flowers that bloomed only at night, schools of fish that emitted soft chimes as they swam, and massive vines that writhed like living serpents. One evening, as they camped on a small island, Elias attempted to lighten the mood. Using gestures and exaggerated facial expressions, he recounted a story about accidentally setting fire to his tent during a camping trip back on Earth. Zanara watched him intently, her brow furrowed in concentration. When he finished, mimicking the explosion with dramatic flair, she burst into laughter. A rich, musical sound that made Elias grin despite himself. "You get it!" he exclaimed triumphantly. "See? Comedy transcends all barriers." Zanara rolled her eyes but smiled nonetheless. She reached out and poked his chest playfully, then mimed throwing something into the water. Elias laughed, realizing she was teasing him about his earlier mishap. For the first time since arriving on this strange planet, he felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could survive this together. But the swamp was not done testing them. One afternoon, as they paddled through a particularly dense section of forest, the current suddenly grew stronger, pulling them inexorably forward. Zanara tensed, her glowing eyes narrowing as she scanned the horizon. She shouted something urgently, pointing ahead. Elias followed her gaze and froze. A massive waterfall loomed in the distance, cascading hundreds of feet into a mist-shrouded abyss. The roar of crashing water drowned out all other sounds, and panic surged through Elias's veins. He grabbed the oar, frantically trying to steer the boat toward the bank, but the current was too powerful. They were being dragged closer with every passing second. Beside him, Zanara remained eerily calm. She stood up, balancing effortlessly on the rocking boat, and began shouting commands in her language. Though Elias couldn't understand her words, her tone left no room for argument. Together, they worked furiously, attempting to maneuver the boat toward any semblance of safety. It was no use. The edge of the waterfall approached with terrifying speed, and Elias braced himself for impact. Just as the boat tipped over the brink, Zanara lunged forward, grabbing hold of him. The world tilted sideways as they plummeted downward, swallowed by a torrent of roaring water and blinding spray. When Elias regained consciousness, he found himself sprawled on a rocky shore, soaked to the bone and aching all over. Beside him lay Zanara, already stirring. Miraculously, they had survived the fall, though neither of them knew how. As they staggered to their feet, taking stock of their surroundings, it became clear that they were no longer in the swamp. The landscape was unlike anything they'd seen before. Towering crystalline structures jutted out of the ground like jagged teeth, refracting sunlight into dazzling rainbows. The air hummed with energy, and strange creatures flitted overhead, their wings shimmering like liquid metal. It was breathtaking and utterly alien. Zanara turned to Elias, her expression unreadable. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, two strangers bound together by survival and circumstance. Then, with a small shrug, Elias offered her a weary smile. "Well," he said, spreading his arms wide. "Welcome to wherever we are now." Zanara raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed by his attempt at humor. But as she glanced around at the surreal environment, a spark of curiosity lit up her glowing eyes. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, as unlikely allies thrown into the unknown depths of a mysterious new world. The forest that surrounded them was no ordinary woodland. It pulsed with life, teeming with creatures both mesmerizing and monstrous. As Elias and Zanara ventured deeper into this alien terrain, they quickly realized survival would require more than just luck or individual skill. The bond between them began to deepen not through words but through shared struggles, moments of vulnerability, and an unspoken understanding that they were each other's only lifeline. Their first encounter with one of the forest's deadly inhabitants came unexpectedly. They had stopped near a grove of luminescent trees, their trunks glowing faintly like lanterns in the dim light. Elias was attempting to gather some edible fungi he'd seen Zanara point out earlier when a low growl reverberated through the air. Both froze, turning slowly toward the source of the sound. Emerging from the shadows was a massive creature, its body covered in thick, chitinous armor that gleamed like polished obsidian. It moved on 6 spindly legs, its head crowned with jagged horns that curved menacingly upward. Its eyes, large and multifaceted, glowed red as it locked onto them. Elias instinctively reached for the makeshift spear he'd fashioned days ago, while Zanara pulled out a slender blade she kept strapped to her thigh. "Any ideas?" Elias whispered, his voice barely audible over the creature's guttural snarls. Zanara didn't respond verbally. She simply nodded toward a cluster of vines hanging nearby. Understanding dawned on Elias. Distract and trap. He grabbed a rock and hurled it at the beast, hitting it squarely on one of its armored plates. The impact seemed to enrage it further, and with a deafening roar, it charged straight at him. Elias sprinted toward the vines, heart pounding wildly. Behind him, Zanara darted around the creature, using her agility to stay just out of reach. When the beast lunged forward, she leaped onto its back, driving her blade into a weak spot where two segments of its armor met. The creature thrashed violently, trying to shake her off, but Zanara held on with fierce determination. Meanwhile, Elias reached the vines and yanked hard, causing a tangle of them to fall directly onto the creature's path. As the beast stumbled into the trap, its legs became entangled, slowing it down significantly. Seizing the opportunity, Elias ran up behind it and drove his spear into another vulnerable spot. With a final, ear-splitting shriek, the creature collapsed, defeated. Breathing heavily, Elias turned to Zanara, who slid off the creature's back and landed gracefully on the ground. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, adrenaline still coursing through their veins. Then, without warning, Zanara let out a laugh. A short, breathless chuckle that caught Elias off guard. He grinned in response, shaking his head. "That was insane," he said, wiping sweat from his brow. "We make a pretty good team." Zanara tilted her head, studying him curiously before nodding once. Though they couldn't communicate verbally, the mutual respect and trust forged in that moment spoke volumes. As days turned into weeks, their encounters with the forest's dangers grew increasingly frequent and increasingly perilous. There were towering insectoid predators that could spit acid, packs of wolf-like creatures with translucent skin revealing pulsating organs beneath, and even sentient plants that lashed out with whip-like tendrils. Each battle tested their limits, forcing them to rely on each other's strengths and adapt quickly to survive. Through these trials, their bond deepened. Zanara taught Elias how to move silently through the underbrush, mimicking her fluid, graceful strides. In return, Elias introduced her to human ingenuity, showing her how to craft tools and weapons from the materials available in their surroundings. Together, they created traps, improvised shelter, and devised strategies to outsmart predators far larger and stronger than themselves. But it wasn't all about fighting and surviving. Amid the chaos, there were moments of quiet connection. One evening, as they sat beside a small campfire, Zanara handed Elias a strange fruit she'd plucked from a nearby tree. Its rind was tough and scaly, but inside lay flesh that shimmered like liquid gold. She gestured for him to try it, and though he hesitated at first, the taste was unlike anything he'd ever experienced. Sweet, tangy, and slightly metallic, leaving a pleasant tingle on his tongue. Elias laughed, holding up the fruit and pretending to inspect it critically. "Not bad," he said, giving her a thumbs up. Zanara smirked, rolling her eyes but clearly amused. These small exchanges became a kind of language of their own, bridging the gap between their vastly different worlds. Another time, they stumbled upon a clearing filled with bioluminescent flowers that emitted soft, melodic tones when touched. Zanara wandered among them, brushing her fingers lightly against the petals, creating a hauntingly beautiful symphony. Elias watched in awe, feeling a pang of homesickness for Earth's simpler pleasures. Inspired, he joined her, tapping out rhythms on hollow logs scattered around the clearing. Together, they created music that echoed through the forest, drawing curious animals closer to investigate. These fleeting moments of joy stood in stark contrast to the constant threat of danger. Yet, they reminded Elias and Zanara of why they fought so hard to survive, to experience the beauty and wonder hidden within this alien world. One night, as they huddled together beneath a canopy of glowing leaves, Elias found himself reflecting on their journey. He glanced over at Zanara, who was staring up at the sky, her expression unreadable. Despite their differences, he felt an undeniable kinship with her. She was brave, resourceful, and fiercely protective, not just of herself but of him as well. In many ways, she had become his anchor in this strange, unpredictable world. "You know," Elias said quietly, breaking the silence, "if someone had told me I'd end up stranded on an alien planet with, well, an actual alien, I wouldn't have believed them." Zanara turned to look at him, her glowing eyes softening slightly. She raised an eyebrow, clearly waiting for him to elaborate. I mean, it's crazy, right? But here we are, surviving, fighting, laughing. Even if most of your jokes go over my head. He grinned, earning a playful shove from Zanara. Seriously though, I don't think I could have made it this far without you. For a long moment, Zanara didn't respond. Then, to Elias's surprise, she placed a hand on his shoulder, squeezing gently. It was a simple gesture, but it carried immense weight. In that instant, Elias understood that their bond transcended words. It was built on trust, resilience, and a shared determination to keep moving forward, no matter what lay ahead. Little did they know, their greatest challenge was yet to come. Deep within the forest, something ancient and powerful stirred, drawn to their presence. And as the days passed, eerie signs began to appear. Tracks too large to belong to any known predator, strange symbols etched into the trees, and whispers carried on the wind that neither of them could explain. Yet, despite the growing unease, Elias and Zanara pressed on. Side by side, they faced whatever the forest threw at them, their connection strengthening with every step. Whatever mysteries awaited them, they were ready, or at least, as ready as two strangers from different worlds could be. The discovery of the gas pipelines came on a day when hope had begun to feel like a distant memory. Elias and Zanara were trudging through a particularly dense section of the forest, their movements sluggish from exhaustion and hunger. The air was thick with humidity, and every step seemed heavier than the last. Just as Elias was about to suggest stopping for a rest, Zanara suddenly froze, her glowing eyes fixed on something ahead. Elias followed her gaze and saw it. A series of metallic tubes running parallel to each other, partially obscured by moss and vines. They stretched out in both directions, disappearing into the depths of the forest. The pipes hummed faintly, vibrating with energy that made the hairs on Elias's arms stand up. He approached cautiously, running his fingers over the cool, smooth surface of one pipe. It felt alien yet familiar, a relic of technology in this otherwise untamed wilderness. Zanara crouched beside him, her expression thoughtful. She tapped the side of one pipe gently, then pointed down its length, miming the act of following it. When Elias gave her a questioning look, she gestured toward the horizon, drawing imaginary buildings in the air with her hands. Her meaning was clear. These pipelines could lead to a civilization, perhaps even a way off this planet. "You think there's a city?" Elias asked, excitement bubbling beneath his fatigue. "Or at least some kind of settlement?" Zanara nodded firmly, her determination evident. Though they couldn't communicate verbally, her body language left no room for doubt. This was their best chance yet to find help or answers. The decision to follow the pipelines wasn't made lightly. The forest around them remained as treacherous as ever, and the thought of leaving the relative safety of their usual routes was daunting. But staying put meant accepting their fate as permanent inhabitants of this alien world, and neither Elias nor Zanara was ready to give up just yet. As they walked alongside the pipelines, the landscape began to change subtly. The towering trees thinned out, replaced by clusters of strange, crystalline structures that jutted out of the ground like jagged teeth. The air grew warmer, carrying with it a faint metallic tang that lingered in their nostrils. Occasionally, they passed signs of activity. Scorch marks on the ground, discarded tools that gleamed unnaturally under the dim light, and tracks that suggested something large and mechanical had passed through recently. Elias couldn't help but marvel at the implications. Whoever or whatever had built these pipelines clearly possessed advanced technology. Could they be intelligent beings capable of helping them return home? Or would they prove hostile, viewing Elias and Zanara as intruders? Zanara seemed equally intrigued yet cautious. She scanned their surroundings constantly, her hand resting on the hilt of her blade. At one point, she stopped abruptly, pointing toward a cluster of trees where faint lights flickered intermittently. Elias squinted, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Were those torches? Or perhaps some form of artificial lighting? "We're getting closer," Elias murmured, more to himself than to Zanara. "Whatever's out there, we're almost there." The closer they got to their destination, the more surreal the environment became. The pipelines widened, branching off into smaller conduits that snaked in various directions. Strange machines stood idle along the path, their purposes unknown but their designs undeniably alien. Some resembled massive drills, while others looked like hybrid creatures, part machine and part organism, frozen mid-motion. One evening, as they set up camp near a particularly large junction of pipes, Elias noticed something peculiar etched into the side of one conduit. It was a symbol, an intricate pattern of interlocking circles and lines that glowed faintly blue. Zanara knelt beside him, tracing the design with her fingertips. She muttered something in her language, her tone contemplative. "What does it mean?" Elias asked, though he knew she wouldn't understand. Still, he appreciated the attempt at conversation. "Is it a warning? A map? Directions to the nearest Starbucks?" Zanara shot him a bemused look, raising an eyebrow as if to say, "Seriously?" Despite the tension of their situation, Elias chuckled, grateful for the brief moment of levity. That night, as they sat around a small fire, Zanara sketched the symbol in the dirt using a stick. She added additional markings around it, creating what appeared to be a rudimentary map. When she finished, she pointed to the pipelines and then back to the sketch, making a walking motion with her fingers. Elias studied the crude diagram carefully, nodding slowly. "I get it," he said. "We keep following the big pipe, and eventually we'll hit whatever this place is." He gestured toward the heart of the map, where Zanara had drawn a cluster of shapes resembling buildings. "City ahead." "Got it." Zanara smiled faintly, her lips curving upward in a rare display of optimism. For all her strength and resilience, Elias realized she carried her own burdens. Loneliness, fear, the weight of being so far from whatever home she once knew. Yet here she was, forging ahead without hesitation, driven by the same desire that fueled him. Survival, escape, freedom. Days turned into weeks as they continued their journey along the pipelines. Along the way, they encountered new challenges. Collapses in the pipeline network that forced detours, swarms of tiny, biting insects that seemed drawn to the metallic structures, and eerie silhouettes moving in the distance, too fast and fleeting to identify. Through it all, Elias and Zanara relied on each other, their partnership growing stronger with every obstacle they overcame. One afternoon, as they rounded a bend in the pipeline, they stumbled upon something that took their breath away. Ahead of them, rising from the mist like a mirage, was a sprawling metropolis unlike anything either of them had ever seen. Towering spires of glass and metal pierced the sky, their surfaces reflecting fractured rainbows of light. Bridges arched gracefully between buildings, connecting them in a web-like network that pulsed with energy. In the center of the city stood a colossal structure, its design reminiscent of a flower blooming toward the heavens. Elias stared in awe, his mouth hanging open. "Whoa," he breathed. "That's not what I expected." Zanara stood beside him, her expression unreadable. She reached out and touched his arm lightly, snapping him out of his reverie. Her message was clear. This was no time for gawking. Whatever lay within that city, they needed to approach it carefully. As they stepped forward, the hum of the pipelines grew louder, resonating deep within their chests. The air smelled different now, cleaner, tinged with ozone. Lights flickered in the distance, casting long shadows across the ground. Somewhere in the heart of the city, machinery whirred softly, a constant reminder of the civilization that thrived here. For the first time in what felt like forever, Elias allowed himself to feel a spark of hope. If anyone could help them leave this alien world, it would be the architects of such a magnificent city. But as they ventured closer, a nagging thought crept into his mind. What if the creators of this place weren't human? What if they weren't even friendly? Beside him, Zanara tightened her grip on her blade, her glowing eyes scanning the horizon warily. Together, they pressed onward, stepping into the unknown with nothing but courage, and each other, to guide them. As Elias and Zanara drew nearer to the sprawling metropolis, the initial awe began to give way to a creeping sense of unease. The towering spires that had seemed so majestic from afar now revealed their true nature. Cracked glass, rusted metal, and vines reclaiming what was once pristine architecture. What they had mistaken for a thriving city was, in fact, an abandoned relic, a ghost town swallowed by time and neglect. The realization hit them as they entered the heart of the facility. The colossal central structure turned out to be a massive research complex, its walls lined with faded insignias and symbols etched into the stone. Inside, the air was stale but tinged with the faint scent of chemicals long since evaporated. Rows of dusty equipment stood silent, their purposes lost to history. Control panels were dark, their screens shattered or blanketed in grime. It was clear this place hadn't seen activity in decades, or perhaps centuries. Despite its desolation, the facility held promise. They scavenged whatever resources they could find. Tools, medical supplies, food rations sealed in vacuum packs, and even functional gadgets whose uses remained a mystery. Zanara examined a small handheld device that emitted soft pulses of light, while Elias tinkered with what appeared to be a communication console. Though none of it belonged to their worlds, it offered hope, a lifeline to rebuild and survive until rescue came. Days turned into weeks as they made the facility their temporary home. They repaired sections of the building, clearing debris and setting up makeshift living quarters. Zanara proved adept at deciphering the alien technology, her instincts guiding her through systems that baffled Elias. Together, they pieced together fragments of knowledge about the facility's purpose. It had been a hub for studying the planet's unique ecosystem, though why it had been abandoned remained unclear. One afternoon, as Elias worked on repairing a broken drone he'd found, Zanara climbed to the rooftop to survey the surrounding area. She often went there to think, her sharp eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of life. This time, however, her vigilance paid off. "Elias!" she called down urgently, her voice carrying through the empty corridors. He rushed to join her, climbing the narrow staircase 2 steps at a time. When he reached the roof, she pointed skyward, her glowing eyes wide with excitement. Hovering in the distance was a helicopter-like ship, its sleek design unlike anything they'd seen before. Its rotors hummed softly as it moved slowly across the skyline, seemingly conducting a search pattern. For a moment, Elias felt his heart leap with hope. Could this be their chance? "Hey, over here!" Elias shouted, waving his arms frantically. Zanara joined him, cupping her hands around her mouth to amplify her voice. "Help! We're down here!" But the ship showed no signs of noticing them. It continued on its path, oblivious to their cries. Frustration bubbled inside Elias as he watched it drift farther away. Then, inspiration struck. Digging through his pack, he pulled out a red light cracker, a small signaling device he'd salvaged during one of their earlier explorations. He'd never used it before, unsure if it still worked, but now was the moment to try. Holding the cracker aloft, Elias ignited it. A brilliant flare of crimson light erupted into the sky, pulsating rhythmically like a heartbeat. The sudden burst caught Zanara off guard, and she shielded her eyes instinctively. But then she saw it. The ship hesitated mid-flight, its trajectory shifting slightly as it turned toward the source of the signal. "They see us!" Elias exclaimed, his voice trembling with relief. Zanara grabbed his arm, squeezing tightly as the ship descended, kicking up clouds of dust as it landed nearby. The hatch opened with a hiss, revealing figures clad in uniforms adorned with unfamiliar insignias. Their faces were obscured by helmets, but their posture suggested caution rather than hostility. Elias stepped forward, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. Beside him, Zanara did the same, though her grip on her blade remained firm. One of the figures gestured for them to approach, speaking in a language neither understood. Despite the barrier, the intent was clear: they were being offered passage. Without hesitation, Elias and Zanara boarded the ship. As the hatch closed behind them and the engines roared to life, Elias felt an overwhelming wave of gratitude wash over him. Against all odds, they had been saved. The journey aboard the ship was surreal. Through gestures and crude drawings, they managed to convey their story to the crew, who listened intently despite the language barrier. It became evident that the ship belonged to a coalition of interstellar explorers, scientists, engineers, and adventurers dedicated to uncovering the mysteries of uncharted planets. To them, Elias and Zanara were anomalies worth studying, but also survivors deserving of compassion. During the flight, Elias and Zanara sat side by side, their shoulders brushing as the ship soared through the atmosphere. Though they couldn't articulate their thoughts in words, their bond spoke volumes. They had faced unimaginable dangers together, relying on each other when trust was their only currency. Now, as they gazed out the window at the stars streaking past, they shared a silent understanding. Wherever life took them next, they would face it together. In a quiet moment, Elias reached for Zanara's hand, intertwining his fingers with hers. Her glowing eyes softened, and she gave him a small, knowing smile. No words were needed. Their promise was unspoken yet unbreakable. Months later, after countless debriefings, medical examinations, and cultural exchanges, Elias and Zanara found themselves settling into a new chapter of their lives. The coalition had provided them with a safe haven, a tranquil planet on the outskirts of known space, where humans and aliens coexisted peacefully. It wasn't Earth, nor was it Zanara's homeland, but it was somewhere they could call their own. Their wedding ceremony was simple yet heartfelt, blending elements of both their cultures. Elias wore a traditional human suit, while Zanara adorned herself in flowing garments, woven with threads that shimmered like starlight. Friends they had made among the coalition gathered to celebrate their union, cheering as they exchanged vows beneath twin suns. Years passed and their family grew. Children filled their home with laughter and curiosity, each one a perfect blend of their parents' traits. Some inherited Elias's adventurous spirit, while others bore Zanara's luminous glow and sharp intellect. Together, they built a life rooted in love, resilience, and the shared belief that even in the vastness of the universe, connection was possible. And so, Elias and Zanara lived peacefully, their story becoming legend among those who heard it, a tale of survival, unity, and the enduring power of hope.